Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Building the Bridge from Planning to Implementation. Are we all ready to go? We have a very robust agenda for the day, and let's get some housekeeping out of the way before we get started. We want to save as much time for you to chat in your counties as we can. So please mute your microphones. We will not be muting them for you. Enter questions and comments in the chat box. The presentation materials are available at the shared Google Drive folder and will also be sent out after the event. And please remember to complete the evaluation survey at the end of the session. Today is so different because it's a hybrid model that we really need your feedback on how this worked. Also, if you get into a breakout room and you need a sign language interpreter, please tell us in the chat and we'll do what we can to accommodate your request. So we want to thank, first of all, let's go over our agenda, sorry. Here's our welcome. We're going to have some information that comes from the Prevention and Early Intervention Committee from the California Child Welfare Council. Then we'll go into your county time. And you'll have that. So you can see the county times are listed there in blue. We'll come back for a plenary and then go back out to have county level discussions. And that will occur throughout the day. So there'll be a plenary that will all be in the same room together. And then there'll be the breakouts for your county to do your individual work. So thank you all of you county teams who have elected to engage in this work and have those in-person conversations. And next slide. We'd like to get a quick gauge of who's in the room. So we're going to launch a quick poll and see who we have here today. Are we having a poll? Okay, I don't see the poll going up, so let's just move on. I'm proud to introduce Oriana Walker. She's the director of ICWA for Picayune Rancheria of the Chickansee Indians, and she's here to do a tribal blessing for us here this morning. So Oriana, you're on. Is she with us?
I think we may have lost her. Okay.
Uh-oh.
She's popping back on right now.
Okay. Oriana, are you with us? I feel like I'm channeling the beyond. Okay, well, maybe we'll have Carol speak first. So Carol Carrillo is the executive director of the Child Abuse Prevention Council of Contra Costa County, and she brings us that unique Child Abuse Prevention Council perspective. And they're also part of innovative partnerships with the Greater Bay Area CAPC. Carol?
Great, thank you, Lola. In Contra Costa County, we started working on prevention planning with OCAP and strategies in 2019. Kathy Marsh, our Director of Children and Family Services, and I pulled together a team to start looking at what comprehensive prevention planning, might look like in our county. We actually had Hillary as our consultant, and Hillary would meet with us monthly, and we developed some strategic planning strategies. We developed a mission statement, and we really did a lot of work. We were a small group. We also actually had Lola come down and meet with us, and we did some asset mapping, and we were a small group, but we were a powerful group. At a few years later, when FFPSA work group developed, we thought it was important that we merge those two efforts and grow our partnership. And so we were welcomed into the FFPSA work group, and we all started working together. In Contra Costa County, we are actually very fortunate to have a parent partner program and a youth partner program. And we heard yesterday just how important it is to have those voices, to have those folks at the table as we are developing these comprehensive prevention plans. So once we merged with the FFPSA work group, we were lucky enough to have Troy Nichols with strategies working and supporting our work. So Troy and I, along with our youth partner program, developed a youth community cafe. And we identified a part of our county that is under-resourced and used our youth partners to help facilitate a community cafe. And it was very successful. I think Troy and I kind of sat back and were like proud parents because our youth partners were so, showed such leadership skills and such sensitivity. And were able to really draw out what were some of the needs of the youth in that community, what would make their lives different, you know, what sort of changes could we make in serving that community. And I think we heard that yesterday as well, is that those voices, our parents, our youth, they are the ones that should be driving this effort. They're the ones that we should be listening to and crafting our work around what those needs are. So that was really successful. We were able to take that feedback and use that in our prevention planning work. And, you know, so that will be part of what we submit to the state. And we also know, you know, just how important those voices are to this work. The other thing that we're doing as CAPSES, as we meet with the Greater Bay Area Child Abuse Prevention Council Coalition. And this is also a partnership that is supported by OCAP and Strategies. And we meet monthly. We are 10 Bay Area County Director CAPSES, and we meet every month to share resources, support, best practices, share what's happening in our counties. But in addition, we are also sharing what each county is doing around their prevention plan, so we can grow and change and sort of hear about what's happening in the Bay Area and what we can all do together to make an impact on prevention. We at the Child Abuse Prevention Council believe that if we are going to prevent child abuse and strengthen families, we need to have strong partnerships in doing that. And I feel like in Contra Costa County, we are so strong and moving in that direction, and that we will be able to make some real impact in our community by these strong partnerships. So thank you for allowing me to talk a little bit about and show off Contra Costa County, because I am very proud of the work that we're doing. So thank you, Lola.
Thank you so much, Carol, for sharing that unique perspective. I believe we have Oriana back. And so if we can go to her slide, once again, she is offering a treble blessing, and she's from ICWA. There we go. She's the director of ICWA. And you're back with us. Yay.
Yes, technology, I'm telling you, especially up in our rural mountain community area. But we have Verizon now, so hopefully it doesn't let us down. Yeah, Hilly, my name's Oriana Walker. I'm the ICWA director for Peki and Rancheria, the Chukchansi Indians, and I come to you today from the ancestral lands of the Yokuts, Chukchansi, and Mono peoples. I'm honored to be able to open and share giving and thanks to the Creator, and I ask that you do so in your own way. Creator, thank you today for all the natural riches you provided us. The water in Yosemite is absolutely beautiful and flowing and stunning. The flowers and trees are blooming, and for each of our health and well-being. I ask you, Creator, to help guide today's group meetings in a way that allows open-mindedness, that helps us think outside of the box, and to come up with a new way of servicing those that are underrepresented and underserved. I ask you, Creator, to help each county have discussions that are meaningful, impactful, and in some cases, life-changing for communities that they serve. To all my relations, Aho. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oriana. So I just wanted to share a little bit of how things went yesterday. Some of the key values that we talked about and that we got to hear from actually in the panels and during the workshops. So this work is really focused in equity, that person-centered and trauma-informed approach to collecting community voice and engaging community members. And of course, that cultural responsiveness. And yesterday's content, I think, really brought these values to life, as well as that shift from the agency-based interventions to the community-based preventions. So we're trying to build a supportive community rather than just expecting one person or one agency to make a difference. And that's pretty important as we dive into today's content. So please consider these values in your discussions, in your discussions, as well as this mind shift. And I just want to, before I pass along, I want to share a quote that Gladys Mitchell shared with us yesterday during the parent panel. And that is, families are not lost. They're just unseen. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Ebony Chambers, who's going to talk a little bit about these recommendations.
Thank you, Lola. And good morning, everyone. It's great to see, I think Juliet acknowledged in the chat. It was just so wonderful to see so many teams on camera today. And as I scrolled through all of the squares, the Brady Bunch squares, it was really amazing to see all of the teams coming together. So I agree with you, Juliet. This is amazing to see this work really continue to grow. I'm going to share some of the community pathway recommendations. You heard from Roger De Leon yesterday, who provided a pretty comprehensive overview. And just as we move into our teams and you're having these conversations today, we really wanted to make sure that we provided some context setting and considerations that you may be able to hopefully take in mind as you continue this dialogue and continue these discussions. You can go to the next slide. So the Prevention Early Intervention Committee, as a part of the Child Welfare Council, has put together these recommendations, and our hope is that they can be considered in your local implementation planning process. The goal of it, and I think Lola did a great job of really sharing some of the high level values that really stood out from yesterday's conversations and workshops was equity, was hearing from family and youth voice, and keeping that at the forefront of all that we're doing. We have a saying in our community, we say nothing about us without us. And that is really in alignment with equity, that we can't create equitable change in our communities without ensuring that we understand the communities that we are targeting for change. And we know that change is imminent and it's necessary to have more thriving communities. And so these recommendations are really intentional for the broader scope of public child welfare, but also impact the intersections of juvenile probation and behavioral health. And so it's important to keep all of those in context as the communities are discussing change within your groups today. So recommendations, number one is the shift of the focus from mandated reporting to community supporting. And Roger shared yesterday a bit, not a whole lot of his story. I've spoken at the Child Welfare Council a bit about mine as well. And just that our stories as folks with lived experience would have looked significantly different had we had community stepping in and supporting instead of just reporting and not giving us resources and layers of support that is necessary to have sustainable change in our communities and in our families' lives. And so as you have conversations today, the goal would be to bring in, how do we start to engage our mandated reporters, our teachers, our child abuse prevention centers who are doing the trainings to bring that shift about. So what kind of training changes do we need to see, and how can we make sure that we're bringing those into our local communities? Consider what supporting looks like. It's more than just saying, here's a booklet of resources, good luck, or call 211 and figure this out yourself. But there has to be a network of support that we're looking at upstream that really supports our community's needs. And most importantly, whatever is designed should be done with community. We should be engaging voices of lived expertise, our youth, our parents, our family members, our kin, to ensure that the training that's being rolled out meets community need by building it with community. Recommendation number 2 around accountability and oversight, that there's a structure for ongoing community accountability in the pathway planning process, and that we aren't just creating this structure of community supporting, but we have a way to monitor if it's really making the change that we hope to see. And we really want to make sure that we're doing that. Number 3 is around consistent definitions. For us to be able to do this work across the state, it's like, again, I can't express how great it is to see. I've seen so much reform over the years, but what I haven't seen is where the state is bringing counties together to hear consistent messaging and make sure that we're operating from consistent definitions. And so this is an important part because our communities evolve and shift, and communities move from I might move from Sacramento to Southern California, and no matter where I go across the state, I should be able to move into that community and not have to learn a whole new language, and really be able to make sense of the terms and definitions that we are all using consistently. Financing, money. With that, we have to make sure that we do have and focus on resources that will support our unique communities, whether that ensures that our communities that have multiple languages, that have diverse cultures, have the right resources to support sustainability and develop infrastructure. That also means that it supports non-traditional partners, our lived expertise with the compensation to be able to participate, and to do it in a way where they're valued, not just for their time, but valued in a monetary way as well. And that there are community pathway advisory committees advise on decisions regarding reimbursement and funding allocations. And then number 5, that goes back to that accountability and measurable outcomes on well-being. And again, we cannot say that we cannot keep doing the same thing without monitoring and seeing that we have sustainable outcomes. And so we should be really looking at, how do we measure for change? How do we ensure that we are getting the desired outcomes that we hope to achieve? Services and practices include supports in the communities, not just evidence-based practices. This goes back to, what does the community say they need? And those are those community-defined practices, culturally responsive practices that are developed with community. Oftentimes, when we've tested out those EBPs, they are not always, they don't always work well for many cultural communities. And I think we have to listen listen to the voices and make adjustments on what works for our individual communities, and ensure that we're training our providers to understand those community needs. And then last but not least, our training and technical assistance to support our community partners and get them connected with the technical assistance. There is a lot of resources and supports available. Myself and Danae Shaw did a presentation or a workshop yesterday on building parent and youth voice into your CPP, your community planning process. And that technical assistance that's offered through UC Davis Center for Family Focused Practice is still available to your local community teams, so that if you do need resources or you're looking for a parent voice, the Parent Partner Advisory Council has that technical assistance. CDSS has the technical assistance. There's many other organizations out there that are partnering with the state to ensure that you have the supports you need. And then the last recommendation, this is the invisible number 8, but is certainly to be true and important to think about and consider, is that these systems that we are working on dismantling, rebuilding, adjusting, and transforming did not happen overnight. And so the change does not happen overnight. We have to be patient with ourselves, be patient with community, and we're in this for the marathon. To see system change, and that's going to happen with community. So thank you all.
Thank you, Ebony, for that quick overview of such wonderful information. I see a question just came in the chat. You listed off a few resources for parent engagement. Where can I find them?
Well, Jory, you were supposed to be in the workshop yesterday. No, I'm just kidding. I will get those linked into the chat. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I'll get those in now.
Okay, can we go to the next slide? And it's time for a transition. So we're going to have some county associations welcoming you. Barrett Johnson, who's a consultant with the County Child Welfare Directors Association of California, and Kathy Martinez, who is a consultant and the retired Deputy Chief Probation Officer for the Chief Probation Officers of California. Welcome to you both.
Good morning, and great to see everyone today. I'm Barry Johnson with the County Welfare Directors Association. On behalf of CWDA, I want to welcome you all to what we hope will be a great day of getting together with your teams and planning and reflecting. A big thanks to the incredibly diverse planning committee that Strategies TA convened. It truly reflected the work and the community engagement that this work involves. I am so impressed with the number of attendees over these 2 days. Today we have over 700 registrants from over 50 counties. And I think this is a reflection of all the hard work that you've done to engage the community as you move toward what we hope will be a new era for child welfare and juvenile justice that's focused on prevention and well-being for children and families. We know that engaging communities and building relationships is kind of the core technology. It's the key to all this work. It's the foundation for comprehensive prevention planning and the secret sauce that's necessary for effective implementation. I want to commend you all for all the work you've done so far, listening and including those with lived experience. We heard from some yesterday, which was amazing, and respectfully engaging tribes as sovereign nations. I also want to challenge you to deepen this work and keep it up. It's just never over. We're still at the beginning of our journey, and we have to keep nurturing those relationships and building on them, and sometimes creating them moving forward. This afternoon, you're going to have an opportunity to meet with your county teams, think through how you can keep up the momentum and stay engaged with the community as you finish up your planning, hopefully soon, and move into implementing your plans. So you'll have a series of targeted conversations with some thought-provoking plenaries in between. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. First, I want to introduce my counterpart at CPOC, Kathy Martinez. Kathy.
Thanks, Barry. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy Martinez, and I am a consultant for probation departments in California with Chief Probation Officers of California Foundation, or also known as CPOC. And on behalf of the Chief Probation Officers of California Foundation, just want to welcome again everyone to day 2 of our 2023 statewide collaborative prevention convening. And as Barry mentioned, just a huge thank you to the comprehensive planning team. I too was a part of that. And others behind the scenes for bringing this opportunity of bringing together systems, community organizations, those with tribal and lived expertise, and others to focus on building prevention systems in our communities. I also want to acknowledge that our organizations, and I definitely know this true for probation departments, that we may have various reform efforts occurring simultaneously. And as you work through those initiatives and those reform efforts, including building a prevention system, focus on your shared values, your new and established relationships, and your focus on practices that can lead to improved results for the youth and the families you serve. This work can be hard, and your dedication is a true testament to your commitment that we can do better for youth and families. Through your prevention planning efforts, you can impact a child's trajectory and divert them from system entries. Thank you again for being here, and I wish you all a great day of progress, whether you're looking towards completion or implementation of your plans. So before we move into your county time, we do have a few things to roll out in terms of logistics. So we just asked for all participants to join a county breakout room. If for some reason you find yourself in an empty room, feel free to bounce back to the main room, and our great TA folks will get you connected with the county team or with the room.
Great, and big thanks to our county facilitators who are going to be leading you for your in-person county teams today. If you are a county facilitator, a couple of small things. For in-person county teams, even if you're meeting in person, please still join the county virtual breakout room, just in case someone's there that was maybe not able to make it in person today or might be hanging out in that room. So please log in there and attend to those people. All the facilitators should have the facilitation guide, but if you don't, or you need another one, or if you are joining virtually and are just curious about what's going to happen, we will drop it into the chat. It really provides step-by-step instructions for some really good beginning conversations about shifting towards implementation today.
And also for those folks, our statewide partners, or those working and serving multiple counties, there is a breakout room for our statewide providers. Feel free if you want to join the statewide group, or if you are more comfortable and prefer to join with one of your county teams, feel free to do that, one of the county teams that you'll be supporting, so feel free.
Great. And with that, I think we are ready to have our first county conversations. So you will have, and you can go to the next slide, you will have 30 minutes, not 30 seconds, but 30 minutes to convene, welcome everyone, and plan for the rest of your day. If you need help and assistance in getting to the breakout rooms, raise your Zoom hand, and we have folks that will get you there. If you go to your breakout room and you need assistance, or you're the only one there or something, then come back to the main room and we'll help you out. So have a great first welcome conversation, county teams.
My name is Andrea Sobrato, and I have the great pleasure of both introducing our keynote speaker and then serving as a bit of a guide or MC as we continue through the rest of the day. The goal today is to nurture and support county prevention teams as they consider best strategies to move their prevention plans from design into implementation. As you heard in your county team time, we will provide 3 30-minute plenary sessions, each tied to a set of key implementation principles anchored to prevention. Following these mini sessions of content, we will give county teams time to reflect on those principles and to consider ways to integrate them into their active implementation work. For those of you who are participating in the statewide breakout group, we hope you will find value today on a parallel track as you reflect on ways to enhance your implementation support to county teams. Just ahead, our first content session will ground us in the importance of ongoing and active stakeholder engagement throughout implementation. the need to center children, families, tribes, and communities, as well as to ensure ongoing opportunities for new partners to become actively involved throughout all phases of implementation through sustainment. As I welcome our presenter, I want to reiterate that we will just be listening for about 30 minutes before county teams and the statewide agency team will have a chance to regroup and reflect on this first presentation. But please join me in welcoming Dr. Robin Jenkins from the Impact Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I just lost my notes. I will tell you that Robin is a fantastic, not only is he an implementation science consultant all over the country, but he is a prevention champion. He is, I'm going to just pause for 1 second and grab my notes one more time because I want to introduce Robin well. He is a prevention champion. He is the founding board member of the National Prevention Science Coalition to Improve Lives and has had a long career heading up large systems along the continuum of prevention to intervention. But closer to home, I should add that Robin has had a huge impact on the work in California, having helped to inspire the launching of the Prevention and Early Intervention Cabinet here in California in 2018, and has been a consulting partner to the cabinet ever since, while working alongside many of us here today to support the development of California's Family First Prevention Services model. He believes in our work and will do everything he can today as a partner and as a friend, and as always, to help us achieve our best success. So take it away, Robin.
Thank you, Andrea. You're always so kind in your introduction, and I really appreciate the partnership. It is my humble privilege to be with each of you today, especially in a moment where you're in such a pivotal role in shifting the culture and the context in California towards prevention thinking. It is just my gift to have an opportunity to engage with you today in these plenary sessions, and then to maybe follow up this afternoon in some question and answer time. So if you can advance the slide deck, I would appreciate it. We can sort of think about the slides that we're going to use today, folks. You know, PowerPoint's an interesting thing. It allows us to give you some content and some ideas, but it's also a reference tool. So I really don't want and encourage you to not get hung up so much on trying to read every word, every letter on the PowerPoint, but to let us highlight some key ideas on the slides and start thinking about how they apply to your county conversations as you head to the breakouts in your future prevention planning. I'm coming along as a guide with a little bit of background in some of these areas that Andrea mentioned. I'm not coming along as an expert or somebody telling you what to do. My goal is to really help sort of oil the machinery, if you will, of prevention thinking for you in each of your counties, and to acknowledge and recognize the amazing work that you're already doing in service to your communities and your counties. I also want to acknowledge and support and lift up the tremendous diversity in California, the role that tribes have, the role that all the different diversities, and just there's so many important aspects of that to recognize and acknowledge as you're trying to think about what a community wellness or a community prevention plan needs to look like. So I want to honor that diversity with always keeping an eye on equity and inclusion. I heard the amazing things that Ebony talked about this morning around centering youth and family voice, and also the experiences where that youth-led task group provided extraordinary insight into what was going on was it Santa Clara? I've lost track of the county, but anyway, that was a lesson learned, the incredible power of youth and family voice, choice, engagement, not just for planning, but for successfully navigating your plan, providing feedback on how the plan is going, helping break implementation barriers, and remaining ongoing steadfast champions for the work, because it is all about them. It's not all about the agencies, it's all about them. Next slide, please. Our work, as you know, you just kind of click through these, it's influenced by the things that you've heard a lot already in yesterday's work. There are tons of resources around. We've highlighted a few of them on this particular slide. The state, through its extraordinary resources, put together the Prevention Planning Implementation Guide, and its link is included in the slide deck. There's also the wonderful PEI recommendations that you heard this morning, which ground every county in sort of these prevention pathway, community pathway ideas that strengthen the role of community in not only defining the prevention system, but shoring it up and using formal and informal services to help build in the connective tissue for these prevention pathways, in addition to what agencies can provide through paid resources. These plans focus not just on any single agency's needs, but on the community's needs, with families and places and spaces where life actually happens. The goal is to move from mandated services to supporting the resources and proactive recognition of people who could benefit from those supports. So there's a full acknowledgement and a planning for primary, secondary, and third level or tertiary prevention as envisioned in these community pathways. But at the same time, this is all being driven by federal and state policy. So we have to acknowledge that this is built on some of the core requirements involved in the Integrated Core Practice Model and the federal requirements around the Family First Prevention Services Act as well. Next slide. So we've got a few objectives today, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but we're trying to focus on practical next steps. This is time to be thinking about, okay, we've done big thinking, we've got big ideas, or we've remembered what happened when we had big ideas and we've narrowed it down to some practical steps to move forward. What does that take, and what does implementation science teach us about effectively doing that in meaningful ways? So we'll give you a little bit of a brief adult learning around some key concepts in today's conversations and create opportunity for shared learning in your planning environments and the breakouts. And then we'll continue to center this on uplifting the important aspects of diversity and inclusion and equity throughout each aspect of these implementation and prevention plans. Next slide, please. Implementation is a stage-based approach to putting something in place and using it as designed in daily practice. There are many dimensions of it, but we're only going to focus on three of the, perhaps some of the most critical where you are in your prevention planning process. We'll talk today about co-creation and stakeholder engagement. We'll also talk today about the importance of assessing and ensuring ongoing improvement. It sounds technical, but the planning for it isn't necessarily technical. It's inclusive and it's thoughtful. And then we'll also finish the last plenary session with talking about sort of advanced thinking around sustaining your implementation and what kind of ongoing capacity building you will need to do to ensure success as you begin to achieve it. People often leave sustaining to later on in their implementation and planning conversations, and it's a big mistake. It's similar to a mistake where people often leave evaluation or trying to understand whether things are working well or not to later on in their implementation and prevention planning. Implementation science teaches us that we need to design those conversations in the front end of our planning so that we know what to expect, what resources we'll need, what roles and responsibilities will need to be in place to ensure that they get done well. And then how will all that get communicated to the leadership and implementation teams that are actually leading and doing the work? So today's conversations are really about giving you some thoughtful prompts and considerations for how you might begin to design these three important aspects of your implementation plan moving forward. Next slide, please. This first component is really about co-creation and stakeholder support. Want to click for me? Co-creation can seem a little buzzwordy, but it's really known as working collaboratively to develop the local resources and abilities. And that's what in implementation science we refer to as capacities. So when we use the word capacity, we're often speaking about, most commonly speaking about, what are the resources and the abilities needed to well implement your plan. Co-creation is really about engaging the people that understand how to define the system you need to put your plan into place and support it. and then to build the skills, the knowledge, the support, and the championship sort of ongoing engagement needed to well implement that plan. So co-creation isn't something that you put together on the front end and walk away. It's a group of stakeholders, champions, lived experience, and lived expertise who can guide your thinking, who can help you understand the practical and the day-to-day implementation requirements and challenges you'll need to face. It'll support and champion the work all along the way. And when there are implementation barriers, roadblocks, things that need to be overcome, your co-creation group, your key stakeholder group, can be extraordinarily impactful in overcoming many of those barriers. So this is why co-creation is critical. You can't build and do these plans alone. By definition, your prevention plans require multiple teams across multiple systems, including multiple and diverse groups of people and systems and agencies. Therefore, they have to include who's impacted and who's doing the work. Your plans have to center partnerships as the primary goal so that you ensure that equity, inclusion, diversity, the tribes, everybody's represented, not because it's an agency-focused plan, but because it's a community-focused and community-driven plan. And it lifts up issues of power and power sharing, equity, and all these other important aspects of diversity and inclusion and experience all along the way. Co-creation is the bedrock and the founding sort of connective tissue, if you will, across the remainder of the elements that happen in implementation. Next slide, please. When co-creation is deliberately, and we use that word a lot in implementation, deliberately, because it's something you have to do ongoing. When it's deliberately done well, you see these things that are represented on the slide as being successes of strong co-creation. You get diversity, you get great trust and actively engaged relationships and partnerships. You assemble a plan and an infrastructure that appropriately reflects a support system that your county is capable of delivering because you've thoughtfully planned for the resources, the policies, and the processes that will ensure success in the plan. You'll also make sure that those local needs are attended to, that this plan doesn't come from some pie-in-the-sky thinking, but it is based on realism from this lived experience and the diversity and inclusion that you're focusing on when you build the plan. By doing that, you foster transparency and openness. You encourage vulnerability and conversations about power sharing, and you also assure ongoing leadership and support to sustain your plan. Co-creation is no joke. It's a really important aspect of implementation, and it's one of the reasons why we put it up front in the conversations when we talk to community groups about this. There's a nice little, I think it's a 2-page article about this that's embedded in the link in the slide if you have time to check in on that resource. Next slide, please. So how do you do co-creation? What are the critical activities necessary to engage folks? One is you have to have a well-defined understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish. People have to know what success looks like if you bring people together for a particular mission or vision. You want to ensure that everybody can learn and co-learn about what are the issues, what are the needs. People have to be well resourced to understand what you're inviting them into. Things have to be clearly, realistically defined so that people understand, if we do this, how will we know we're being successful? You heard this morning, and I know you heard yesterday, that the success of this work stands on the ability to actively broker, engage, activate, and ensure strong relationships that are transformational, not just transactional. Just what can you do for me, but what can we do for each other and in support of our community? These co-creation activities define and operationalize that collaboration. And there's a tool later on in the presentation that we're going to talk about that does that. They promote processes for mutually engaging and reinforcing agreements and activities, and they tailor supports based on local county needs around all that diversity, data, community characteristics that we've already mentioned. Okay, next slide. So what about the functions of co-creation and engaging stakeholders? How do you do it? Well, it means that you actively build a plan that resources the prevention system around prevention in terms of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. It also means that you consider the demographics, the people that are experiencing different kinds of problems, and the people that are successfully navigating the system in your community to understand the kinds of diversity you need to invite in the conversation. Then you build both an effective leadership team for your implementation plan, and you'll ultimately create an implementation team that will do the day-to-day work of that plan. You'll assess and use ongoing learning to figure out how that implementation plan is progressing. And you'll also want to know how stakeholder processes are working. Are people feeling effectively engaged? Are they being heard? Is communication and feedback going back to them so that they in turn feel like their contributions are being valued and lifted up? They want to be on the front end of actively championing and messaging and reinforcing the contributions of its members. And you're going to want to vigilantly attend to ongoing leadership and commitment and trust to the co-creation process, as importantly as you're contributing to the ongoing support of the plan itself. So if you haven't sort of intuitively figured this out by now, implementation is about supporting the use of the plan and the process, in addition to actually doing the work embedded in the plan. So we're thinking at two levels here. We're thinking about supporting the system that enables effective implementation and supporting the work that's going on within that system. I hope that makes sense. Co-creation really helps design both the prevention system and enables the environment for it to succeed. Next slide, please. You already have many resources in the works. You've been referred to some in the Google links and the shared drive resources. This slide just points to some of those resources that are at your disposal for the concepts we're talking about. When you're doing co-creation, there are some very concrete tools. Sometimes they're called terms of reference, memoranda of agreement, memoranda of understanding, but they document and specify the roles, responsibilities, the duties and expectations, how people are going to communicate, what data are going to be utilized, and all those other things that sort of create the active planning and responsibilities for what you're taking on. You're also guided by the integrated core practice model and the core practice model, which have wonderful ideas around how you engage each other, agency and cross-agency partners and partnerships, and also those who are community partners. The CPP implementation guide is an excellent resource that gives you a lot of nuts and bolts around the functional areas that need to be completed within the prevention plan itself. And of course, you have the community pathway tools. All of this is supported by an array of Family First federal and state resources that are embedded in various websites. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about the spectrum of community engagement. Okay, next slide. So what processes do we need to engage and retain partners? It all starts with identifying who these key partners and stakeholders are. This often means having community forums, listening sessions, talking to consumers of services that are active in your agencies, your nonprofits, your child advocacy centers, your faith communities. And then somebody has to systematically kind of begin to map them by role and function, figure out who folks are, what they represent, what are their influences, and what are their interests and shared experiences and expertise that can come and inform this prevention plan. Part of this includes creating a communication, outreach, and engagement plan. People have to know that this opportunity exists and how they can get involved. What does that plan look like? It can be fairly simple, but you need a communication and outreach plan. There are also, just like in the implementation plan, an engagement plan sort of notes documented roles and responsibilities so that that communication plan is also well carried out and well managed. A co-creation partnership lays out this plan and dutifully assigns roles and responsibilities, and then supports people in ensuring that that engagement happens. And then you go and execute the plan using consistent feedback, celebrating when the plan works well, and really reinforcing people's contributions. You guys know better than me that these things need to happen outside of normal agency hours. You do them in community settings where people live and work, where they are dealing with the day-to-day dynamics of what happens to families and community members, and not just, in the normal channels that agencies operate in. You're always scanning for opportunities to create mentoring and supports for these folks, including paid participation, transportation, opportunities for childcare, things that encourage co-creation partnership engagement and do not create barriers for that. Next slide, please. So here's using the integrated core practice model and the core practice model, the sort of engagement behaviors that you could kind of use to drive your thinking around engaging. These are just some examples of potential co-creation partners: family members, children, other caregivers and supports, various community members in various roles. Who might be stakeholders? Those are often defined as people who have a stake in the outcome, the benefits of the system itself, and other cross-agency partners. So you could actually use a matrix or a grid like this to say, hey, are we engaging in these kind of behaviors with these kind of folks to ensure their active and engaged participation, and to elicit their expertise around developing our county prevention plan and supporting it down the road. So this is just an example tool to illustrate what we're talking about. Next slide, please. We've been mentioning the spectrum of community engagement to ownership for a while now. This is something we lift up a lot in our implementation support, because we understand that in order to shift prevention from an agency focus to a community-based, community-owned focus, some power and resources are going to have to be shifted outside of the traditional pathways to get resources to communities. So this spectrum of community engagement illustrates how to think about moving from basically ignoring and staying agency focused to fully, actively, and collaboratively engaging community members, where if you do this in full measure, you ultimately shift the full project to a community ownership level, and agencies and sort of system partners become the backbone, become the support of that. They become sort of the folks that are resourcing it, but the decision-making and the resourcing all happens at the community level. Now, you have to profess that many state and local systems have struggled with this. It's not something that people do well, so it has to be figured out. But this is your opportunity. This is California's opportunity to innovate, try this on, work through the difficulties that are going to come when you start shifting power and changing resources to local decision-making, and figure it out. This is one of the most pivotal times in the country where federal and state policy allow this thinking to occur. So this tool can be used to help guide you around what kinds of things you need to think about in terms of messaging and the activities, and how you begin to allocate resources across these different levels. Next slide, please. Remember that all stakeholders and champions, if they come to the table, they expect and deserve active involvement in the decision-making, and it has to be meaningful for them. It can't be tokenism. It can't be isolationism. You can't just be there because of the seat you occupy, although that may be one of the reasons you're there. It has to be because you have something meaningful to offer and something meaningful to benefit from by their participation. Clear understanding of roles and responsibilities, explicit ways to reinforce contributions and efforts, and then leadership of that work really must ensure safety and trust and being able to show vulnerability. Some folks come to the table have never heard of any of this stuff, so there has to be patience in helping them ask questions that seem very basic and elementary, giving them opportunities for learning, really supporting and leaning in when they need language help financial assistance, just emotional support for being engaged. Co-creation is all about meeting people where they are and them valuing their participation, while you're also seeking their help in solving the problems of implementation of your plan. Next slide, please. Okay, we've reached the point where we've emphasized the really important aspects of of co-creation and stakeholder engagement. And we've put in the slide, I know they're in the facilitator handout, some team prompts for you as you go into your county breakouts to actively and proactively think about how you, if you're already doing it good, these can be checkoffs. If you're beginning to do it or you're sort of midway in the process, consider these prompts for thinking about how you can build these co-creation partnerships and teams to ensure ongoing implementation success for your prevention plan. These prompts are listed on the slide. I'm not going to read through each of them. And Andrew, I don't know if you have any more to add as we move to the breakout segment.
Yeah, no, Robin, I just want to thank you so much for bringing such great principles that remind us about the need to shift power from agencies to communities in order to support community-based solutions. And that, gosh, equity-based implementation is really like relationships are at the key, and that constant ongoing stakeholder engagement, centering families and youth and tribes and communities is the only way to make that shift where from agencies having the power to communities having the power. So thank you so much for reminding us about those principles. And I think at this point, we are going to send county teams to work. So you guys have a facilitation guide and your facilitators will walk you through some questions to help integrate some of these principles into your own work. Thank you guys. We'll see you back in 30 minutes. The breakout rooms are closing, and I'm just noticing folks are coming in to this larger session. And we hope that you had a really powerful time with your county team and the statewide agency team. We hope your time felt energizing and it invited you into some deeper thinking about quality engagement and the need for quality engagement to ensure transformational change. We know relationships are key, and transformation cannot happen outside the context of relationships. So I hope that counties felt that they had good space, a good atmosphere to talk more about being strategically mindful of centering families, communities, tribes, and children in this work. I'm wondering if county teams, if you feel up to it, if you want to drop into chat, any kind of big takeaways or ideas that you were thinking about, what you were wrestling with. If you want to, we want to invite you to drop those into chat. No pressure at all, but we'd love to kind of surf, sort of where folks were at, just as we kind of continue on in the day. We are going to move now into talking about how important it is to have an eye on embedding processes that ensure ongoing improvement, and that what you're finding, what you're paying attention to is actually driving action in an ongoing way, so that no plans are in concrete, but that plans are adaptable, and that the data that people are really hungry for and what's meaningful to the entire team, not just the 4 agencies in service to what they're reporting, but the kind of data that everybody wants to see on the team, those indicators, the benchmarks, the quality stories, maybe process results or process evaluations, but that all teams have access to the kind of data that is meaningful in service to ongoing improvement. So I'm going to turn it back over to Robin, and we'll just welcome you on back, Robin, and take it away.
Thanks, Andrea. And thanks you guys for coming back. I bet your last session was really informative and exploratory and learning about and talking about those co-creation partnerships. So feel free to add things to the chat or sort of keep track on your capture sheets, if you will, any questions or support needs moving forward. I also want to reemphasize a couple points that have been said all along. These plans are not something that's going to get written down and never changed. The important thing about moving from planning to implementation is the recognition.
Hey, Brittany, how are you?
Is the recognition that you're going to always be learning. You're always going to be gathering input in data, not just about the services being delivered by some of these evidence-based programs or practices, but also the activities that support them, the systems that are engaging each other to ensure that the primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention happen. So your feedback loops are as important as the actual things going on. They are the additional circulatory system, if you will, providing nutrients to your local prevention system. Without that feedback, both to the people that are giving and providing services, but those who are supporting the system itself, you won't really know how the plan is progressing. So it's vitally important that your team think about how data figures into the conversation so that you can continuously grow and learn as a county prevention group while you're sharpening your tools, if you will, and making sure that the services effectively align, support, solve or reduce problems that they're designed to do that with, and that they are culturally and contextually sensitive and responsive to the kinds of folks that you're hoping to support in your counties. Let me just also reemphasize the historic nature of this work. This country has never before had an opportunity to blend and leverage federal, county, state dollars and other resources in a comprehensive prevention plan ever before in the way that you're being asked to imagine it now. So it's okay to feel daunted. It's complex, it's big, but at the same time, you're going through this prevention planning and implementation process to start putting together the probabilities of where you want to begin, understanding that there's no expectation of perfection. And by doing this together, you're going to walk this journey, learning together and learning from each other. That old African proverb, you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go together, if you want to go far, go together. So going far is the goal here, and you do that best by going together. The importance of assessing and ensuring ongoing improvement data means that we're going to be talking about information and data for both the process of implementation and the programming or the services delivered through implementation. So you take away all the jargon and you really say, are we doing what we said we would do when we start to collect information? And are we doing it like we said we wanted to do it? Have we engaged the people that we wanted to engage? Tribes, folks who don't understand our language, folks who are new to our culture, folks who have been here a long time and who can offer wisdom and experience, folks who understand informal support systems as well as formal support systems. And are we activating and nurturing those community pathway goals that we all think are really important to this? If you've been around as long as some of us, I won't name any names except my own, you understand that we will never, ever service our way out of all the human needs that we face in our communities every day. We'll never have enough human services through any of the organizations and agencies that effectively meet the needs and prevention responsibilities that families would optimally need. So we've got to be strategic in thinking about how these prevention plans do the best job in the best way with the right folks. Your data systems will help you answer those kinds of questions. Lastly, you'll also need to document what you're measuring and how you're measuring it, because that feeds the sustainability conversation that we're going to have in the next segment. So putting together your data plan and your data team will not only inform the work you're doing in the process of supporting that work, but will also support the sustainability planning you're doing and telling your impact stories down the road. Next slide, please. For those of you who have been in this work, you've heard all along that the county prevention plans from the Family First Prevention Services Act and the CDSS responsibilities note that there are certain opt-in requirements to the planning process. There are 4 of them listed on this slide. You're required to monitor the collaboration So this is not how many people are you serving? How many evidence-based practices are you standing up and delivering? This is about the collaboration. Are you building the infrastructure to ensure that this plan can succeed? Thinking about all the elements we talked about in the first segment. You're also obligated to examine how each county will be implementing the chosen evidence-based practices, not just what they're doing, but are they doing it with fidelity? That's a fancy word for, are they doing it the way they were designed to be delivered and in the way that people should be coached to support them well? That's one of the hardest things we know to do in human services. It takes a great deal of effort to implement well-designed evidence-based practices and to support them with fidelity. And you already heard early in the opening segments about the fact that many counties have tried this and have struggled with different elements along the way. Again, nobody's expecting perfection. We're all learning. So the use of data to map these questions and to answer how you're attending to both process and product will help you comply with the state's expectations around ensuring fidelity in the EBPs you're delivering. You also have to ensure that tools and measures conform to all state and Title IV-E agency requirements. That's not an option. So part of your planning will have to bring in agency folks with the skills and experiences to help you answer the bell on that question. And you have to utilize the automated response system in automated data system in California, the CWS, to collect required reporting data for the Title IV-E prevention program. So again, we're sort of beginning to, I hope not scare you, but lift up this idea that there's a combination of process work that goes on to build the support system for ongoing evaluation and continuous learning, and the technical elements needed to have the measures and report out on those measures in the required way that the CPPs have to do. Next slide. This is an optimal, if you will, sort of, gosh, if you could sprinkle the pixie dust and have the best possible cross-agency prevention plan, it might look something like this. This graphic was crafted out of a plan that came out of Pennsylvania, and it really nicely illustrates many of the segments or streams of activities that can occur in the service community in a local county. Not every county does each of these things in broad ways. We were just in the break listening to smaller counties talk about, the challenge that some of these prevention plans really cause, smaller groups of people with fewer resources. So we get that. I'm particularly sensitive to the fact that this is about doing what you can and then looking for technical assistance and supports along the way, and not feeling like, gosh, with so little resources, how are we going to pull all this off? Let's start with the possible and build from there, instead of thinking about the overly impossible and wilt under that pressure. This is about all that, I also want to go back and support and thank the planning team and strategies and all. There was a co-creation process in building the presentation for the prevention convening yesterday and today, and an implementation team that's making it happen. So there's actually a parallel process that has built what you're experiencing today. They are learning too about what's working well, and they're collecting data through evaluation and feedback. So you're going to do the same thing in your county prevention plan. And we're going to encourage you to not sort of, feel so overly pressured about all these technical requirements that it doesn't feel doable. It's completely doable, and it's doable with the resources that are being put in place to support you. Getting back to the slide, so these plans usually have, and this is the part about supporting the cross-sector engagement piece, data agreements, cross-system data agreements, because you're going to need data from behavioral health, child welfare, the school system, probation and parole, or juvenile justice. You're going to need other data from your community agency partners, the CAPCs, the folks that are engaged in the community pathways who want to support the data. I know that in my state, we have an integrated homelessness continuum data system that I have some responsibility in supporting. And I know that homelessness system data really help the cross-agency continuum of care for homelessness understand the gaps and resources available so that they can be planful about resourcing their support system. You will also have a need for cross-agency data teams. As a behavioral health practitioner, you won't really understand the data system over in juvenile justice or the school system or child welfare. So you're going to need folks from the different organizations to inform the data systems they have, the elements in those systems, what kind of confidentiality agreements encircle them, and how you can integrate data to answer the bell about this county prevention plan in a robust way that really informs the work. You're also going to need routine integration of how you review and learn from the data. And as we've already talked about, that happens with your co-creation partners. They're going to want to know what's happening. They're going to want to know and see evidence of implementation, short-term impact, and long-term impact. But you're also going to want to know from a program implementation, are you serving the right folks in the right way, in the right doses, if you will, and getting the impacts and outcomes you hope to achieve. So you're going to have to create review processes that document those questions and lift up where those, where those reports, where those measures, where those analyses go, so that people in the implementation team, the leadership group, and the co-creation stakeholder group all hear about what's going on. We also know from implementation science that part of growing and learning together means that you may take small portions of what you're doing and pull out pieces to more actively measure and see if things are going well. These are called small tests of change. One example of that is a Plan, Do, Study Act or a Plan, Do, Check Act. We also talk about usability testing and some other techniques in implementation science that can help you with this. But the bottom line is, this often feels so daunting and overwhelming that it's easier, for example, let's say you want to do a functional family therapy intervention in your community, and you want to know if that's working well. So you might want to pull out, 3 months worth of data and think about the support system needed to well implement the FFT, the functional family therapy implementation. So that might be one small test of change. Like, how are we doing in this 3-month cycle, looking at the support system and the way that we're delivering FFT with fidelity? You could do that with any of the other EVPs, or you could also look at your collaboration processes and pull out portions of them to collect some qualitative and quantitative information, and then share that back with each of the 3 levels of teams that we've been talking about. So these small tests of change play a really important part in lifting up how things are going within the areas that you're studying, but also the overall implementation plan and process. Next slide. All right, so where to start? Where do you go with all this technical data stuff? Getting and using data are fundamental aspects. There's some basic questions you might want to ask. What do we really want to know? Given what we want to accomplish, what do we really want to know? What's required? We've just walked through many of the requirements. There are others. But we also want to know some things that are broader than those requirements. There are local contexts and county needs that are way more specific and tailored to your individual team needs that are not in those requirements. Do you have the constellation of people that you really need in the stakeholder group? Are they meeting regularly? Are they feeling supported and engaged? Is their feedback effectively ensuring support of ongoing implementation? Those are questions that may not show up in a core requirement document for the CPP, but those are things I would definitely want to know if I were in the process. You also want to know why you want to know it, because data are technical and they become very complicated very fast. I've sat in many, many data team meetings, and I often joke that data conversations are like mushrooms. If you've ever been out in the forest in a mushroom and you stumbled across a patch of mushrooms, you notice that they sort of populate themselves Nature has a way of fertilizing them and expanding them. It looks like, well, how does that happen? Nobody's been here to plant mushrooms. Well, data elements are like that too, because people say, well, I'd like to know that. Well, I'd like to know that. And before you know it, you start adding so much data and so many questions to the data plan that it becomes impossible to track it all. So you really want to slow down and specify, what do you want to know? What's required? Why do you need to know it? And then, does what you want to know really address what we have to know? You want to make sure that you align your data interests with the requirements and then what your locally tailored plan would like to find out. As you begin to refine those questions, you're going to have to learn who has those data and in what form. You'll often find that those data are in fragmented or poorly developed formats, and there'll need to be some developmental efforts to build the data system that you want to have. Part of that can be in your plan. Your plan can include assessing and building out the data system for broader future use. So in case, and it's most likely that you don't have it all in place right now. How can county teams make sure that data and learning activities are practical and realistic and manageable? Some of that is trial and error. You want to start small and build from there. You don't want to take on and overpromise data activities that you cannot deliver, because you'll frustrate the data teams, the implementation team, and then people will have expectations for information that can't be delivered. So think about data processes that address the plan as it's actually being activated. Thinking also about how these data will inform the questions that you're shaping about the future. Are things working? Will it work down the road? And what will it take to sustain our success? Lastly, how can teams ensure equity? It's really, not everybody sees data as helpful. Many see data as oppressive, as stigmatizing, and you're going to have to do a lot of work in your co-creation processes and county data teams to ensure that you're addressing questions around equity and inclusion and diversity in ways that pull out issues of potential obvious or implicit racism and other biases. So this is a conversation that needs active attention, and I really want to just call it out on this particular slide. Next slide, please. We know from implementation best practices that these data processes have to be linked and monitored to you will ultimately create something called a logic model. A logic model simply estimates what you're putting into the work, what kinds of resources and abilities, what we referred to as capacities earlier, in terms of inputs, money, people, activities, and then what kind of outputs do you expect from each of those inputs? How will they lead to specific goals? And ultimately, how will they lead to specific impacts? Those logic models are very technical, but they don't have to be. But you'll ultimately want to link your data plan to what you say in that logic model. You'll also want to monitor your implementation capacities. If things are not working well in terms of the numbers that you're pulling out of the data system, one of the important questions will be, did we have the data, the capacity and resources in place to really do this work well? How do we know that what we're seeing is the result of good implementation or positive or negative readiness in the system to do this work well? So you have to create the readiness to do the work, and then you have to do the work well. Your data will inform both of those questions. You'll also want to focus on some of these small tests of change to see how implementation is going along the way. You'll assess your support system and talk to the people who are receiving services, the people who are experiencing the plan, to find out how things are going, and then bring that information back to your original baseline data. Are you making a difference? Are you moving the needle? And the way that you consider that is that you look at the data that you collect along the way in the implementation plan and the programming that you deliver, and compare that with your baseline data, what you collected to even predict what you will need to do as you build your plan. Because this is sometimes technical, You'll also want to maybe consider a partnership with, many of you have universities or branches of universities in your communities, other agencies that have evaluation or monitoring experience and expertise. Sometimes they're referred to as intermediary organizations. They're basically groups who know how to plan, deliver, and support evaluation. And I think, they're often good people to have on your data team, even if you're not contracting them with them to do the work. So you might want to think about partnerships with them in an active and ongoing way. Lastly, from this slide, I really want to continue to lift up this idea of how important it is to be transparent in your data. And that requires transparently communicating data to all the stakeholders, all your co-creation partners. What makes people worried and nervous about data is when it's held closely. You want, like if it's held within an agency and people aren't willing to share it. Even if it's not positive data, you want information out there so people can understand what's happening in the spirit of transparency and all the conversations about power sharing and attending to equity. So creating data agreements and processes for ensuring communication of that data with stakeholders is really critical. Next slide, please. There are basically 3 levels in this conversation. There are data about your implementation plans and processes. We've been talking about that in the early
County
session.
Employment Services, this is Julian.
We're talking about implementation plan and processes and the activities. Those data will ultimately lead you to thinking about data that are reflecting your short-term and intermediate outcomes. So your process data around, are we delivering the services we intended to deliver? Are we reaching the families and people that we hope to impact? Are the right amounts of services getting to the right people in the right way? Are the populations impacted in the way that we want to make sure that they're impacted? Are our stakeholders effectively engaged? Those are all process activities. Those are all process questions. Then you want to think about, well, what's changing? Are people getting better? Are their problems being reduced? Is crime going down? Is homelessness being reduced? Is child maltreatment being reduced? Are people, and not that all those are negative indicators. You also want positive indicators like, do people feel like they're being supported in the community? Are people being employed? Are they able to complete FAFSAs and get federal help for ongoing education? Are they reducing and improving their family functioning so that children are feeling supported and there's less family conflict? So there's lots of impact, short-term impacts you're going to see from those process elements that I just talked about. And then all that leads to impact stories. Impact stories are both qualitative and quantitative, but they are the longer-term things that your community is going to achieve through the community prevention plan. Next slide, please. Here's an example, just an example. There are about 100 ways to do monitoring evaluation frameworks. But to make this concrete, I wanted to show you an example of what we mean when we're doing monitoring and evaluation in a county prevention plan. So you'd see for example, in this framework, there would be a particular goal. Let's say you want to reduce out-of-home placements for children going into foster care by a certain percentage. So your planning team would set a goal, and then you would say, okay, what indicator would help us understand whether we're achieving that goal? You would talk about how it's being calculated and how it's being defined. And you would start with a baseline value. Let's say your baseline year is 2023, and then you might measure this 6 months out. What's the target value? Let's say you want to reduce it by 10%. How will it be measured? Well, you might go to the child welfare system and look in their data system and find out how they're keeping track of out-of-home placements. And even the state data system or the Berkeley Indicators Project. How often will it be measured? You'll just decide. Maybe it'll be quarterly, might be semi-annually, might be annually. Who will ensure that it makes that and make it happen? This is always about documenting roles and responsibilities and how will it be reported. An outcome might be, that you're going to reduce it by so-and-so, so that you'll no longer be as dependent on out-of-home placement, and more families will be supported in the community and so forth. So you'd fill out this grid in ways that define each of the goal, the outcomes, and the output for each indicator over time and delineate those roles and responsibilities. Next slide, please. So most community prevention collaborations have to define data teams or work groups. Next slide. These teams usually consist of within agency data analysts, the people who understand the nuts and bolts of their data systems. They often include within agency quality improvement, the continuous quality improvement, and the quality assurance staff that most, if not all, child welfare agencies have or look to. Most agencies have some sort of information technology staff who understand database design and reporting skills. There are also leaders in those organizations who have an understanding of the infrastructure and data systems and who can understand how to access data, ensure that things are timely and informative. You want to have staff who can speak clearly to what are reasonable indicators and how do you make sense of them? And this is where it jumps off the track from agencies into the community. You want community folks on those data teams who understand a little bit about what are the needs, what are the questions, what do we really want to know about these plans? How can we ensure that we're interpreting these data from a community lens with a youth voice, a family voice, a sense of context? How are the tribes represented? You want to make sure that people who have communication skills can shape those data and tell stories that speak to the impact using those lenses that we've been talking about. This requires both community and cross-agency persons who can design and ensure that the data system always maintains that focus on proper context. And of course, there are others that I'm not even talking about that you might need to include. Next slide, please. All right, where can data be found? There's just a couple of quick links here that California already has in place. Next slide, please. You have some state dashboards. There's the Berkeley Indicators Project. There's digital services. There's the CFSR review portal and so forth that are listed on these. You also have local county portals, data portals in the agencies. But I can promise you that you're going to have to, in the process, begin thinking about building a cross-agency data infrastructure that will marry some of these existing resources and then construct or modify new resources in service to these county prevention plans. Next slide, please. All right, we're to the next breakout, and we're going to sort of expose these prompts to you. Andrea, do you want to come on and sort of reemphasize these prompts?
I just want to say thank you so much and remind everybody that we are recording today and your PowerPoint is in the link included that we dropped into chat earlier. So I just wanted to make sure you had so many wonderful tips and ideas and principles in there that we can come back to. I just wanted to say to county teams, this may have felt like a lot. Your facilitators have 5 or 6 questions to kind of slowly walk the team into some really good reflective conversations around what kind of data would be important for us to be looking at now at this early phase of implementation. Who has that data? How can we get that data? And we want to make sure that all county teams are listening to everybody in the room because there may be some data that's coming quick to some people, and then some might take a little longer to think about, you know, what would another perspective value, and that might look like, you know, in the community pathway, the FRC, you know, how do the FRCs experience their work in the community pathways? What are they seeing from families? What are they, you know, what are the questions that families are asking? And gosh, we want to know those questions that families come in and ask. And so that might not be a traditional kind of data pool from a database. And so we really provided this time to really open that up and to say, just to reiterate what Robin said, that, you know, data about how it's going as well as the impact on the plan, all that data is important, and there's really not a bad data source. It's just what would be useful for your team over this next 6 months of implementation. So we want to open it up to you all. I'm going to open the breakouts right now. We'll have 30 minutes and then we'll pull back and release you guys before lunch. So have a good time in your county teams and the statewide team. Well, I think that little recording in progress is my cue to begin, but I did not want to shortchange you guys on lunch at all. I think it's 1 o'clock and we'll get started. I hope y'all had a great morning and a great lunch. We were looking into some of the county rooms and we were so impressed with the spread. Like, gosh, my Diet Coke and Cheez-Its doesn't hold out to those big old sandwiches and cookies and all that stuff. So I hope y'all are having a good time with each other. I was wondering if we could, again, I just kind of invite you to enter anything into chat. But what I'd like to know now, if you want to just enter into chat, is there anything that your county teams traveled through or the statewide team traveled through today that you felt like, gosh, we did some great work on that point. That was a good question and we really got somewhere. If you could describe some kind of a highlight or spotlight of any aspect of work that you felt like was really useful in your county, would you drop that into chat? And I don't want to contain it just to today. If you're a county that y'all have been doing some great work and you'd love to just kind of call that out or spotlight on yourselves and in your work, that would be great. We will be kind of looking at the chat as Robin begins. We're going to head now into our last of the kind of 30 minutes of content. And this time we're going to be talking about ensuring that your implementation processes, the activities of the implementation work, not only help you forge, pathways of action, but that they're really built to last. We want to talk about capacity building and how, it's really a myth to front load capacity building before action is taken, but capacity building must be built through all stages of implementation. And even in sustainment, you're building capacity to sustain the work. You're always building capacity because the contexts are shifting. There are always challenges. There are always hiccups and wrinkles and turnover, and maybe funding sources become sort of obsolete or whatever reason, but challenges do happen along the way. And so we wanted to invite counties into some really good time to reflect ahead in your own community. What might those challenges be and how will you kind of gear up and make plans to overcome them? So we're really going to talk about sustaining implementation through challenges. And I'm going to, at this point, I'm going to watch the chat. I hope somebody will be brave enough to enter something into chat. We'd love to see and join you in being really proud of the work that you did, even if it's the smallest thing today. You had a great conversation about something. Drop that into chat. And at this time, I'm going to just invite Robin to come on up, and together, both of us will watch chat.
Thanks, Andrea. I do hope everybody took some time to refreshing over lunch and to just catch your breath. This is a lot of material, and implementation can feel technical, and in some ways it is. And in other ways, we're just trying to get you to think about it. If you're already, if you had your plan accepted and you're already well underway, hopefully these ideas will refresh some of the core concepts that you might want to revisit. We've given you an appetizer on co-creation, staying with the food metaphor. We fed you a lunch of monitoring and evaluation and getting data to use it for knowing what's happening and how well it's happening. And now we're going to expose you to a little dessert around sustaining your work. And hopefully at the end of all this, you'll feel confident in driving your plan forward like somebody left the gate unlocked. You're ready to go. No holding you back. I see Andrea shared that some teams are already sharing some of their general neglect rates and taking a look at that data together. Fantastic. Yeah. Good that you're getting concrete about that. I'm just going to, again, take an opportunity to help you think through the historic nature of this opportunity. What you're planning in what I believe, and I honestly believe this, is an opportunity to transform your community prevention system. Not just take a federal or a state or a county agency perspective on strengthening services, but truly envisioning a wellness and a safety and providing a developmentally healthy pathway for children and families that completely alters the landscape of how you do work in your county over time. You're not going to do it in a year or two, maybe even 3. But as you build this infrastructure, thinking about these best practices and making best use of the resources that are coming down through policy and program, you can do some of the most amazing system transformation that's ever been imagined. It's truly not been in place in my professional career, and that now spans 4 decades. So I'm telling you that this is an opportunity of a lifetime. Not to put any pressure on you, but to just open the door to your thinking that this is not an agency experience. It is truly a policy and system reform experience. And to take advantage of that opportunity, it's time to start thinking about the things you need to have in place for it to last. You're not just doing this to meet the requirements of a grant or a new funding opportunity. You're doing this to finally raise your voices and your skills to acknowledge what it takes to build a wellness and a prevention system where families truly get the resources they need when they need it in the doses and the context that they require, not just for the next 3 or 5 years, but for life, for the entire future. So this sustainability question is equally as important as the other 2 concepts. When we talk about sustainability, we're really asking these key questions. Are we deliberately, intentionally directing our attention to assessing, monitoring the ongoing resources and abilities, what Andrea referred to as capacities, and then ensuring that our co-creation, implementation, and ongoing improvement processes are there, well managed, or taking care of business? And do we have the resources to make sure that happens? You're also asking, are we building and maintaining those resources so that these things continue down the road? That shows up in ongoing and engaged cross-system and community leadership, ongoing and engaged stakeholders, a process that engages and ensures a well-supported implementation team who are working with those community partners, and a well-established data analysis, reporting, and communication system so that everybody can stay on top and on track of what's happening in your plan and in your implementation processes. Great too that people are continuing to share information in the chat. I love that Riverside is talking about their concrete logic model, and what data are needed and how they will attain it. You make my heart flutter when you use those terms, and it sounds to me like, Simon, you're really helping them with that. That's fantastic. Next slide, please. When we think about sustainment, the ongoing existence of the very definition of sustainment is really that things are put in practice and become business as usual, and that they are done the way they were planned with, whatever adaptations you need to do to make it fit your context. But you're looking for things that reform and change your system so that the new things you're doing in service to prevention, primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, become day-to-day routine practices that are of high quality, with fidelity, and adhere to the principles and values that your prevention system have established for those things to be in place. So when we look at what needs to be sustained, the graphic on your screen really looks at sort of the things that are often assessed. These particular elements come out of something called the Program Sustainability Assessment Tool, but they're just there for illustration. They're looking at, do you have environmental supports, the key partnerships, organizational capacities, communications, all the things we've been talking about all day. Are those capacities not only well delivered, but do you go back and revisit, do we have enough? Do we have the right kinds of capacities? Do we have the right people and resources in place for the work that we're trying to do? Is the infrastructure well defined? Do you have those things like we mentioned early on, charters, terms of reference, MOUs or MOAs that really outline roles and responsibilities and hold the partners accountable for ensuring well-delivered processes and programs? Those communication protocols and practices, the data platforms, sending and receiving feedback, and then, of course, the accountability that we've been talking about all day. Your prevention planning team really should have, I know it's a lot of work. People say, well, who's going to do all this work? Part of implementation is sort of stepping back and slowing down and putting into place the work on the front end so that all this runs well during and it's already done on the back end. If you don't do that, when things break down, somebody will raise their hand and say, well, what was supposed to happen? And people will shrug their shoulders and they'll say, we don't know because we never documented our plan. We never documented our communication protocol. When we have conflict, we didn't really write down how we were going to work through and solve it. We didn't really clearly adhere to putting on paper how we're going to measure things and report out. So the more that you build your plan and you document things, the easier it is to use those for sustainability planning and for accountability in the sustainability process. You're also going to be looking to have well-documented and utilized planning tools and systems, and also community data collection and sense-making tools. So I know your head is spinning. You're going, gosh, I'm not sure if we signed up for all this, or how do we get all this in place? You don't do it all at once. You put in place what you can do in the first 30 days, the next 60 days, a 6-month plan and a 12-month plan, so that you begin to build these elements one by one until you have your fully fleshed out implementation plan and build toward that sustainability plan that we're talking about. Next slide, please. When we think about the support system for your plan, we're really thinking about sustaining, or at least attending to the sustainment of 3 levels in that support system. We're going to need to click 3 times because there's some numbers on this graphic, by the way. There you go. The implementation plan itself requires a host of supports: infrastructure, training, money, time, computers, information platforms, a host of things that require the ability to get into people's homes or be in communities and provide parenting information or job resource information, applications for loans, solving immigration status issues. There are all kinds of things that need to be in that support system for effective prevention to happen. So when we think about sustaining it, we want to think about those support elements that ensure that that happens. There's also the actual, what's going on in those programs. The second thing, which is delivering the services, making sure the agencies and people have the right competencies and capacities to deliver both the evidence-based practices, the wraparound and the care management and the care support functions that go with them, and then all the administrative functions that ensure that they're well delivered and sustained over time. Not as unimportant, but sometimes harder to get to, because this is where the power sharing comes up. This is where the resource sharing, how things get decided and how things get allocated and solved, is the governance level of that support system. So when we think about sustaining, we want to talk about writing sustainment plans and goals that ensure we're going to continue to deliver well-targeted, well-tailored services. We're going to ensure that the support system's in place for that to happen. And we're going to make sure that we can adequately plan, resource, and support that support system through administrative and governing activities. Governing is sort of a formal term. You can use something different. Decision-making, power sharing, resource allocating. There are all kinds of phrases you might use, but I'm sure you get the point. It's how things flow in order to make sure that support system is in place and that effective services are being delivered. Next paragraph, please. Or slide, thanks. When you're starting to think about your plan, you're going to be swimming in ideas around where do you begin. Most community organizations that I've ever participated in and done this kind of work with usually start with the doable. They start with thinking about what do we need at a bare minimum to comply with our FFPSA plan once it's submitted and approved, and then build out from there. So thinking about those 3 levels, the co-creation stakeholder, the support system, the support system level that has all those stakeholders and partners that ensure the infrastructure for making things happen. What does that look like? How do we design that well? And then how do we document what needs to be in place over time so that it stays highly functioning? Then that delivery system, what are the actual services? Where do they live? Whose roles and responsibilities? And then what capacities, which in our terms means resources and abilities, need to be in place to ensure that those things are going to continue to be helpful to people, to do what the plan requires to be done. You're going to know that from your evaluation data, from your monitoring and evaluation data, because those data are going to feed what's working well and match that back to the kinds of people and problems you're hoping to address. And as things change, as invariably they will, you will modify your prevention services plan and your sustainability plan as things change, so that you can learn how to make adjustments over time. What you don't want to put your county team in the position of doing is trying to get all this stuff in place, feeling really good about all the hard work that you are doing now and will do in the future. Step back and say, okay, we've got time later on to think about how we're going to sustain that. Because surprises crop up, funding things change, new regulations come out, new populations that require services pop up. There's always things happening dynamic in the policy or the program or the service environment that will need your ongoing attention. So documenting what you're building today and what you'll do in the short term is where you start. So these elements that are on the graphic look at how you might analyze your plan. You want to think about what you do to build and maintain those effective partnerships. A critical, and let me say critical again, a critical important element is how you're going to develop and ensure ongoing engagement of leaders in your community that will look after this work. This isn't a passing new shiny object from government. This is an effort to change community-based infrastructure in partnership with government, but should be community-owned, community-maintained. That means you'll need to build and sustain a leadership recruitment, development, engagement, reinforcement process that makes sure that you have ongoing community-based leadership that can look after this. It's not enough to champion it on the front end, but to ensure that ongoing investment from leaders all along. Now, that doesn't mean that same leadership group has to always be in place. You can have leaders that help grow and develop the initiative. You can help leaders that help implement and manage the initiative. And you can help leaders who help communicate about and support the initiative through policy, politics, and others. So those leadership teams can vary and be flexible, but documenting what you need and how you need to sustain it is a critical part of planning for that sustainability. How you'll create engagement and community buy-in, and how you're going to use your data and other monitoring evaluation systems to know what's actually happening. It's really important that you communicate good communication and visibility of your plan. It's going to take time to roll out your plan, help people know that services are out there, what prevention looks like, and where they can access these services in what forms and so forth. Planning for all of that in your sustainability work will also be important. Your next steps today are going to be to break out for an extended county session for an hour to do basic SWOT analysis, which are strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threat analysis. Sometimes they use challenges instead of threats. To think about where you have elements of strengths, where you have gaps that you need to strengthen, which might fall under the sort of weaknesses category, where there are opportunities to continue building on or align your plans towards sustainment and sustainability, and what might get in the way, where you're going to need co-creation stakeholders and partners to go ahead and identify those implementation and those sustainability barriers up front and begin thinking about a plan for navigating them or even removing them. That's one of the fun things about thinking about sustainability on the front end. Because when you go to your co-creation and stakeholder partners and you see all these potential barriers to what you're doing, they can go ahead and begin to lean in and say, okay, we see that coming. Let's create some avenues, some strategies for dealing with that, instead of waiting for something big to pop up and it stops you in your tracks. So that's what the SWOT opportunities are about, is giving you an idea to where you begin today for looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges in your plans, where you need to start thinking about documenting things so that you can, create your sustainability plan, and how you're going to engage your leadership and stakeholder teams to think about this in a kind of a visionary way as you're putting things together. Next slide, please. There are some warning signs that you'll recognize when sustainability has not been accounted for. I'm not going to read all these boxes, just going to sort of reflect on a couple of them. When leadership starts to fluctuate, when it waxes and wanes, that's a warning sign. When there's constant turnover and that turnover has not been planned for, there's not duplication or mirroring of functions in your system, that's a warning sign. When there are known capacities that work is required or resources required in your system, but have not been planned for, and there's no strategy to go out and develop those capacities, that's a big red flag. When there aren't documents, materials around that show roles and responsibilities and how things are going to get done, that's another red flag. Failure to go ahead and put in place the hard planning that has to happen with the compliance requirements of the plan, that's a warning sign. And the last one that I'll mention is, I really can't emphasize this enough, we are really good at convening groups and community projects. I've been on a number of community initiatives, gun violence, drugs, homelessness, behavioral health challenges, all kinds of things in my community. And consistently, those groups have failed to effectively engage and maximize partners relative to diversity, equity, and keeping that voice engaged over time. It's all because the work often shifts to a backbone organization that does the technical work. That stakeholder group and those key partners can become subjugated. They can become secondarily, inadvertently pushed back because the work gets into a primary focus. And that failure to effectively engage that stakeholder group, keep them engaged, keep them informed, and let them help navigate the implementation barriers of your plan can be a really big warning flag for problems ahead. So I just wanted to point out a few of these. Next slide, please. So as you think about sustaining your plan, next slide, please, and facilitating that conversation, you're going to be doing this SWOT analysis with the purposes to synthesize some sort of summary about where you are today, whether you've fully got a plan submitted and accepted or approved, or whether you're in the beginning stages. Be honest about where that landscape looks like and where you need to begin in terms of the sustainability plan. Some of you are so early, you're going, gosh, well, we'll get to that. That's okay, but now you've got some guardrails, a framework for what you need to be thinking about as you think towards sustainment. For those of you that are in the process of already in the plan or have the approved plan, we're going to ask you to use active listening and street focused language to engage your team around, have we thought about the things we need to think about? Lift up and address crucial conversations. Reiterate and identify the goals that the compliance goals that you have to have for the plan, and also the process. You can't just focus on delivering the plan around services and getting agencies together. You also have to focus around what you're going to do to ensure that plan goes well. So we're always thinking at two levels: the implementation plan and the system that ensures that plan goes well, and then the actual things within that plan that happen that go well. So work through that SWOT, being comfortable about digging deeper and deeper. We sometimes recommend that when people furrow their brow and they say, well, I'm not sure about that, ask why. And then when you get an answer, if you're not clear, ask another why. Ask another why. And ask it 3 or 4 or 5 times until you feel like there's no more answer. And then you've gotten a clear understanding of the root cause or the root issue you're trying to get to. You don't have to solve everything today. We just want you to get started on that analysis and try to go through each of the quadrants, the 4 quadrants, but then bring back your ideas around what it will take to sustain your plan, thinking about these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges, so that you have a bit of an early blueprint moving forward as you take the next step in your county prevention teams. One more slide, please. This is an example of a co-creation matrix. And typically implementation happens in stages. So you'll see that there's sort of 5 stages represented across the top of this matrix. But down the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see there are various enablers, known functions or capacities that make sure that implementation may go well. I'm not going to read them all, but they're there for your resourcing and thinking about as you go into your SWOT analysis. We've talked about all of them today in the various plenary sessions and probably in your breakout sessions as well. These things ensure effective implementation of both the process and the programming and services that you will deliver. So as you're thinking about your SWOT, think about these enablers of success and what it will take to make sure that they are sustainably put into your planning process. Okay, next slide. We're at that breakout point where we're going to turn you loose. We say that a lot in the South, although they often say turn you loose. We're going to turn you loose now, and we're going to let you go.
But I'm going to go get them. You can't go too far. I got to go get them, Robin. I mean, they're not loose yet.
Yeah. Go for it, Andrea.
I am from the South. I'm not going to beat you. So I wanted to kind of like your wonderful principles, and certainly it's a implementation best practice to embed sustainability early in your implementation work. You're already thinking ahead about how to sustain your plan. This is incredible. And I just want to kind of transition to the county teams and the statewide agency team. I want to kind of turn attention to the facilitators of the county teams. And again, if you're in a county team and there's not necessarily an identified facilitator, it is okay. We dropped that facilitation guide in the chat early on. Your facilitators are kind of prepped and ready to go. The slide that Robin had on, and Serena, can you back us up 2 slides, that sort of the tips around ensuring the quality of conversation? One more back that. If we could hang out here for a second and just say, as you're going through those quadrants, the rich part of doing this work together is to leverage the diversity of perspective in the room. And so as you're kind of banging out some things around your strengths, your assets, the commitment, and you're in that first quadrant, just want to kind of sort of amplify that everyone can contribute to that. And the strengths, based on how you're situated in the work, the strengths may be very different, as would the anything that you're wanting to optimize in terms of opportunities. The threats or the challenges might be very different depending on where you sit. And so this eclectic, diverse, inclusive process, we think that we're sort of building a firm foundation to move forward, as diverse as the contributions will be. So the facilitators are going to spend about an hour with the county teams walking through this process. Then we will have a break for 15 minutes. And I told the facilitators earlier, if your team is running out of gas, you can nudge that break up. It's okay. We'll come back to large session and we'll do kind of a send you off to break. And so really you have an hour and 15 minutes. So I want to let you know that you have more time. And I also want to know that we're probably not wrapping up in terms of like banging out actual next steps based on that SWOT analysis in this section. That'll be in the next section. So feel free to just sit and digest this assessment process, and don't feel like you're like, what's the next step on that? What's the next step? We don't want you to hurry through this process. So I just wanted to say a couple of those little sort of facilitative pointers. Relax into this. It's going to be a great quality work in your team. So we'll send you off now to the breakout groups, and you have an hour. Welcome back. We've got about 30 minutes or so to kind of wrap up. I'd love to just offer again, if you have any questions for Robin, based on anything that he said today, just further questions, please feel free to either come off mute and ask them or drop them into chat. And I think before we went to this last 45-minute time with our teams, we had a few kind of questions dropped into chat from Carmen Franco in Ventura, and we would love to just kind of start maybe there. And then as the chat, please feel free to keep dropping in questions. We've got about 15 minutes or so for Robin to respond. So welcome into chat. Robin.
Yeah, welcome back. And thanks for all the hard work you guys have been doing, not just today, but for the past 2 days and in leading up to today's session and what you're going to be doing beyond. You have big cheerleaders around the country watching you, and especially in California. So proud of the hard work you're doing. Just reflecting on some of the feedback in the chat, a couple of the questions were pretty centered around some peer sharing kinds of things that may be coming up in California. I know that the TA team here and CFPIC may be working on some peer sharing opportunities, some strategy sessions. So I would be on the lookout for some of that as well. Particularly around those issues about how other counties are dealing with various MOUs around data sharing, information sharing, any kind of bridging regulatory environments, things like cost sharing as well. That's a very technical conversation that I think counties will need to lean in with both their county and state technical assistance folks to think about ways to do that. It's a new world. The rules are changing some. And there's a lot of education that needs to happen around cost and cost sharing, but also people have already begun to do some of this work. And I think the peer sharing, along with the TA and the state and other supports, will be helpful for those kinds of questions. The middle question in the chat around breaking the barriers of fear and stigma is one that I think a lot of us are always interested in. These issues are both implicit and explicit when we start to do this work. I wish I had a long time to talk about this. It's one of my favorite subjects, but just some cliff notes about that particular question. I also come from the behavioral health world, and I know that that's a particular question in that domain as well. Breaking barriers around stigma, bias, both implicit and explicit, really requires having uncomfortable, hard conversations. But it also starts with sharing accurate, truthful information that maybe gets vetted by, maybe you assemble a committee of folks, interdisciplinary, cross-cultural group of folks who look at what kinds of biases and stigma may be in your community and think about what sorts of information may be helpful to address that. It's often useful to lift up people who have worked through bias and stigma, who have overcome, for example, coming out of corrections and have been able to get, their life back in order, maybe achieving a job and finding housing and then working in a community successfully, overcoming drug and alcohol addiction, overcoming severe behavioral health problems, homelessness, challenges in school where people have been expelled and can't get back in. So having role models who have overcome some of that and can talk about ways that they successfully navigated it can help people do that. Finally, mentoring. If there are community folks who are willing to, either through paid or volunteer roles, can lift up people who would be willing to get engaged in conversations around reducing stigma and other barriers related to the work you're doing. Creating a support system for those who want to get engaged in that work, and then leaning on their talents. What do they need? Where can they provide information, tell stories, testimonials? So this also works back into your support system for what you plan to do in co-creation and publicizing about your plan. So there are a lot of strategies you can use. Everything that happens in an implementation plan sort of requires its own plan. I guess you guys have learned that by now. They don't have to be complicated, but they have to be deliberate and they have to be woven into the broader plan overall. So that's why sometimes people need work groups to kind of tackle the diversity of challenges that come into implementation planning. So there are a lot of things happening in the chat around accessing FFPSA dollars with regard to the limitations of Medi-Cal. I see that Amy's answered that. So extension for the spending a block grant, that's also a state question. I don't know. I know Hillary's going to come on after me and provide some follow-up. I don't know if people want to lean in and begin to address some of those at this point or not.
Robin, there's a question, Robin, from Santa Clara. There's one that I think would be perfect for you to answer. How can we lift up systemic barriers as they come up? That might be good for you. And I think Hillary, as she transitions in, can hit some of those California questions.
So I'm sorry, I can't see the question in the chat. Say it again.
Yeah, from Santa Clara, one of their questions is, how can we lift up systemic barriers as they come up? And she references the feedback loop.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for asking that. You know, I think in effective community coalitions that I've studied and been involved in, people identify a willingness and a commitment to do this in a deliberate way. In other words, they create capacity to sit down in a room or a virtual room and say, okay, what are the barriers that we see? What are the stigma? What are the other barriers that we see that are known? What are the processes that we might want to take about, we might want to talk about in terms of both identifying barriers and thinking about strategies that we may want to try on to reduce these. Some of that might mean bringing in educators. Some of it might be developing communication products. Some of it might be going around and having listening sessions in the neighborhoods and communities to listen to what people are worried about, and then trying to offer, again, role models, accurate information to receive information. What are people needing more feedback and information about? And then creating an internal capacity to do that. Document what you're hearing and what you're worried about, thinking about what assets and resources you already have in the stable to go after and begin to tackle those. Think about what more you want to learn about and what partners you can bring to the table who may be able to assist you. So clearly there are a lot of learning components to breaking and reducing stigma and barriers, but there's also so many strengths and assets in existing communities, people who are addressing them head on and who are overcoming them. And if you can recruit them to be your ally in the work, but also support them in being your ally, not just in a token way, but in a really collaborative, sharing way, I think you can make a lot of progress in that way. But again, all of this is about being deliberate, documenting what you want to know and what you learn. What are you seeing? Who's in your coalition or your team that can begin to help? Who might need to be recruited or come in? And then how you can support that process and start building strategies to go after it one by one. Information, I found, is the single best way to disarm people, even when things are entrenched in a system. Providing data, objective data that people have had a chance to go through and make sure it's true data, it's contextually relevant data, and then wrapping stories around those data that dispel those myths, that address the stigma head on, and that lift up successful ways in which it's been overcome, and try to not confront issues head on, because people love a good argument, but represent facts that really speak to success and how things work in ways that don't take political or argumentative statement. People often live in stigmatized or prejudiced or stereotypical thinking because it fits a certain value system or a fear or anxiety that they face. So you want to address those fears and anxieties head on with accurate information, with undoing misperceptions of what you're offering. And even if people's experiences in the past have been really negative, you can project hope by offering examples of where things have gone well and where you expect things to go well given the support you're putting in the system.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you for such an informative day. I know my head is pretty full and I learned a lot, not only from you, but also in our statewide discussion group. So I want to echo what Andrea said about you did it. Great job. You made it through the day. You spent a lot of thoughtful time thinking of ways to jump from and bridge from planning to implementation. So wonderful to you. Give yourself a pat on the back. And I'm going to answer some of these questions here that are in the chat. I see one from Santa Clara County. Is there a process for counties to modify their plan after being submitted? Absolutely. Even after your plan has been approved, you can submit an amendment for us to review and approve as well. And just to let you know, the state will be reviewing our own plan each year. And if we feel that we want to make amendments, we will make amendments also. How can we lift up systemic barriers as they come up? Please feel free to reach out to the state. There's a couple of different ways that you can do that. One way is through our CPP support request form that is on our website. Another way is through our FFPSA Prevention Services mailbox, which is on the slide that is on the screen. And I believe my staff is going to drop it in the chat as well. Third question from Santa Clara. Will the state offer webinar training on co-design? Well, this is great timing for that question, Santa Clara, because we're currently right now thinking of what the training will look like. I know Monica is involved in that process. I don't know if she's still here. So we can definitely think through the idea of including that as part of the curriculum. So thank you for lifting that up. Let's see. San Diego. What can we learn from other states and how will that information be shared? So we've been focused on figuring out how information can be shared between counties. Hadn't thought about also sharing information from other states, but I do know that the Casey Family Programs and Caltrend Learning Series has done a great job of sharing examples from other states. And the upcoming webinar on, I believe, June 21st, will be focused on community pathway and how to conceptualize it, plan, and implementation. And that information will be from other states. Okay, I'm just browsing through here. Beatrice asked about Medi-Cal requirements, and Amy responded, thank you, Amy, that we'll be releasing additional guidance around the payer of last resort. As well as there was a great breakout yesterday by Alex Briscoe, and that recording will be made available. San Bernardino's County's question, I don't really have an answer for that one, but I'll definitely lift that up to my leadership. I'm not seeing, I don't know, Andrea, do you see any other questions? I don't see any other questions.
Either.
Okay, all right. So I'm here to share how can we help you. You all have been working very hard today, and we want to remind you that you're not alone in this process. This is a journey, and we're all learning together, and we're partnering together. And a lot of those partners are here on this call. So CDSS is not doing it alone as well, thank goodness. So on this slide, as I already mentioned, you can complete our support request form to ask for assistance, as well as send a question to our FFPSA mailbox. Also a reminder about the Wellbeing Learning Series, and it's not just the one that's hosted on June 21st. There are also other learning series that have been about primary prevention. They've talked about the social determinants of health. There's been several different learning series, and those are all housed on the Caltrend, the California Training Institute website. In addition to that, we also have our FFPS website, our CDSS one, and it includes a toolkit, as well as more information about the different comprehensive prevention plan components. One of the items on that website is a template. So when you are developing your plan, I'm not sure where folks are in their development of their plan, they can use this template to help them guide to make sure that they're meeting all the requirements. So finally, I'm very excited, and it's interesting because this came up during our statewide discussion that this was something that we need. So I'm even more excited to share about Cal Prevents, which is an online community of practice that is being created in partnership between Casey Family Programs, Implematics, and the Office of Child Abuse Prevention. So let me tell you a little bit about Cal Prevents. So first of all, we've heard not only during comprehensive prevention planning, but also during voluntary prevention planning, that it would be so beneficial for all of you to be able to communicate with each other and share examples of your innovative work. We've also heard that you really would not like to have a lot more meetings or conferences or convenings. So what we think is that the solution would be to create a virtual space for this peer sharing. And this solution is what we're calling is Cal Prevents, and it's the online community of practice. And we hope that it will roll out in late July. It is a community of practice that is developed and maintained using the internet. We will be using a platform called Mighty Networks. It will have many features, including active members who are practitioners or experts, members who participate in a process of peer-to-peer exchange and collective learning, and collaborating on ideas and documents and sharing among members. What will Cal Prevents make available? Cal Prevents will allow for sharing practical experiences and work products associated with development of programs for child and family well-being across counties. First, we're going to focus on California's Family First Prevention Services Program and the Family First Prevention Services Act. We hope that eventually Cal Prevents will go on to serve as a central hub for all statewide prevention activities that counties and Title 4E tribes innovate over the next several years. Cal Prevents will be designed to encourage peer-to-peer interactions and will eventually have affinity groups that could be geographically oriented or topically based for sharing ideas. The site will have audio and video recordings, documents, as well as live streamed events, chats, and private messaging. Members will also be able to customize their accounts to be notified of events that interest them. So OCAP, in partnership with Casey Family Programs and Implematics, are excited about this new online community platform and hope you will share the potential benefits of Cal Prevents with your collaborative partners. So with that, I will go ahead and I believe pass it to Michael.
Yeah, and so we'll go a couple slides ahead to kind of wrap up. I think that was, so this is for our closing reflections. And to share your thoughts, and we'll have a representation on the screen of kind of our collective experience. When you think about California's prevention vision, what is one word that comes to mind? And I don't know if folks have done a Mentimeter before, but you can either go to menti.com and put in that code below, and thanks, that's now in chat. Or you can, if you're real fancy, you can hold your phone up and do the QR code, put your phone camera on, and zoom in on it. And then open it in your browser. So have folks gotten to it? And now we're about to share the results. Yeah, folks are already putting it in, contributing their reflections. Collaborative, hopeful, innovative, exciting, rising to the top. It's kind of intuitive, but folks who are new to Menti, I bet you guess that The bigger words have had the most people responding. And even if you look down in the little words, there will be recurrences of the same thing, variations on those themes: collaboration, collaborative, hopeful, exciting, healing, transformative, change, complicated, for sure, complex. No shortage of reflection. Healing is growing, community, ambitious, opportunity. And we really have gone a long way towards making the kind of two of the top two, collaborative and collaboration, a reality today. And just amazing to see the folks in the rooms in the counties. It was amazing to be in the discussion with statewide organizations. I know we as a planning group are going to get back together and think about how to really communicate some follow-up to all that we've done today. All right, and I think I'm handing it off to our MC for today, Lola, to close things out. Don't know if we want to watch this for another minute while it's still in motion, but oh, this is important. Thank you, Marissa. The evaluation survey, please go into chat and click on that. And please respond right away. It gives us real-time information and we get the data right away. And so we will reflect immediately on how to follow up. Please put comments in and let us know how this experimental hybrid structure worked out for folks. So now I think I hand it off. Lola, is it you next?
I think it's you, but
Still me to say goodbye. That's all right. That's all right. I'm the closer. Okay. Thank you, everybody. And thank you everyone who's been involved in this planning in today. The county's making today a success. The really diverse and amazing, unprecedented collaborative planning committee making it happen. And as much as we celebrate the success, please do tell us what'll make it better. But we look forward to hearing more through the CalPrevent and through the newsletter of all the successes people are going to be doing. Strategies will be right there. Our work will be shifting from the comprehensive prevention planning more to helping to develop the capacity of that infrastructure for the community pathway. So more to come on that. But thank you, everyone.